Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to the End of the World podcast. It's only been a couple of years since the previous episode. The reason for that is quite simple. I'm Glenn, your host, by the way. The reason was that once everybody realized what COVID was doing and how serious it was, there wasn't that much for me to say. I didn't have anything that was going to be said that you wouldn't hear 100 other places. Everybody talked about COVID all day long, everywhere. But we have another topic today that is just existential. It is just something that is so bizarre that I can't understand it, but you have to be aware of what is going on. And that is that there is a truth. There is something in front of you that just cannot be denied, that no one will put their lips to, that no one will talk about. No one. And I promise you, when I get into this in about less than 60 seconds, you're going to say, yeah, that's weird. That's obviously true. But why has nobody had the courage to say it except Glenn? And I don't know the answer for that, but I do know what we have to recognize. I don't want to use the word accept, because we should definitely not accept it, but we should adjust all our expectations of the legal and especially the criminal justice system, so that if they do nothing like they're doing now, we will get rid of every last one of them, fire every last one of them. And here's what we're talking about. And there's actually 5 of these, but we'll go over the most obvious, I have to say that the old expression was so tiresome. They'd say, oh, it's the elephant in the room, But here's the elephant in the room that nobody is talking about. And then we'll hit the second elephant in the room that nobody has the courage to say. Except me. The first one. Donald J. Trump, the only logical explanation for all those documents in his possession at MaraLago, or it doesn't matter where they were, is that he's a spy. And nobody, not Joyce, not Ali, none of them have the courage to say that's what he's doing. And yet it's as obvious as a person can be. Now, the evidence against the Rosenbergs, and I have a distant relative with that last name. I'm no relation to the Rosenbergs, but it still would cause me problems when I would apply for jobs. People would ask, are you any relation to them? And, that was 80 years ago? I think 80 years ago, yeah. And the Rosenbergs were arrested on 1/10 the amount of evidence that there is against Trump. And they were executed. They got the death penalty. So why is nobody, absolutely nobody, except me, saying the evidence in Donald Trump's possession, whether he offers an explanation for it or not, is clear evidence of spying? He's a spy for Russia. Maybe for other places too, but he's a spy for Russia. Now, he has been a spy for Russia for a long time. We know it. I mean, you can always establish that by showing that every person that he gave a job to is somebody that our intelligence agency had checked out previously and said, don't hire that person they have suspicious origins, and oranges, both. So, the number of people that he hired and gave jobs to, all of whom were in direct employ of Mad Vladimir Putin, it was clear. There was not even any ability to deny it, to discuss it. And that brings us up to number 2. Okay, number 2 is something that got a little bit of play, but in light of all of these documents that they have found at MaraLago, and the only explanation for them being that they are the evidence of his spying, the answer to that is look at his first day in office. What do you mean? Look at what Donald Trump did on his first full day in office. The day after, the 20th, after he was inaugurated, his first meeting was with the Soviets. Well, not Soviets, wait a minute, the Russians. Soviets were gone. The Russians. So the 2 Russians who right now are on TV bad-mouthing both the U.S. and the Ukraine, or it's only Ukraine, you don't call it the Ukraine anymore, and Ukraine, daily bad-mouthing, accusing us of causing the impending nuclear war. Those were the 2 visitors that he had at the White House his first day in office. First day in office. You want to spin that out a little further and look at it a little more? Why did he have to have that meeting with them with absolutely no Americans, including intelligence and security people, making sure that the room wasn't bugged, or maybe more importantly, how about somebody in the room to make sure they didn't shoot him? No Americans were allowed in the room when he had the meeting with the Russians. That tells you everything you need to know. If you hear that and you go and you don't say, wait a minute, that guy's a Russian spy, get him the fuck out of the White House, then you are a Russian spy. There is no explanation for that conduct that is both possible and logical, other than he was thanking the people who got him the job. I don't know if you're aware of this, but accidentally, they were not supposed to publish it, but one of the Russian papers, the morning after our election in November, in which Trump stole the election, but one of them published "Our Man Won" as the headline. Our, O-U-R, man, won, W-O-N. Now, that had been given to them by the same people that give the newspapers in Russia their headlines, but they had not gotten permission. That was not decided upon yet, that it was going to be the headline. And in fact, it had been decided that was too obvious. If they printed that, the word would get out to the United States, and every person with half a brain or more would know that Trump is and was a spy, and would dial him out, pay no attention to him, do everything they legally could to get him out of office. But the paper accidentally did print it, and next week, I'm still having some research done, but next week we're going to find out what happened to the people that did the printing. How much trouble did they get into? But the newspaper did print "Our Man Won" as a judgment or an appreciation of the United States election, giving Donald Trump the office of president. Do you remember Jared having a lot of trouble because he couldn't get into a couple of sites that he wanted, but especially MaraLago. He wanted a direct line to Russia that United States security could not eavesdrop on. And he didn't get that. Thank friggin' God. But what is the explanation for that other than he's a spy and was selling out our country? What other explanation? Do you need a phone secure from the FBI? The FBI can't listen to that so that you can talk to Vladimir Putin? I don't think so. I would hope not. Anybody who does is a spy. And that's so obvious I shouldn't have to say it. But there are people that will deny it. Remember, there is a very beautiful building in Russia where they house all of these howler monkeys that when they see or hear my explanation, they'll write, "Oh, you're crazy, you're an idiot, you don't know," and that's what they're paid to do. Most of them are 18, 19 years old, and they get a job in there just basically espousing Russian views and vaguely threatening and trying to bury the views that are anti-Trump and therefore anti-Vladimir Putin, because Trump and Putin are the same. Do yourself a favor for a very good laugh. I call the man Vladimir Putinesca. Look up, if you don't know, the meaning of the word Putinesca. It's an Italian word, and it very much is appropriate to our man Mad Vlad. So that's the second and third point. But remember, and I find it a great saving grace. If you're ever in a discussion with a Trump supporter, why would you do that? But if you are, and they're going into the amount, their role that the Russians give there, here's how to fight when a person tries to badmouth the Russia or the Russian interference, get that picture that you can find online so easily. I mean, it is the easiest thing in the world. You just have to get in there and Google and search for Trump and Kislyak. Now, Kislyak, there are, I believe, 2 photos of he and Trump in the White House with no Western U.S. security people with them, and they are smiling and happy. You've never seen Trump this happy. I'd never seen him happy, I don't think, in my life. But the one set of pictures you can get and put on your phone for anybody who is arguing about Trump as a great person has Kislyak and Trump with their arms around each other, celebrating and laughing that they've won. What could those 2 people be celebrating together? What common interest do they have? And the answer is that Kislyak and the other guy whose name escapes me, but I'll find it out before we part ways, their goal is, of course, to take over the U.S. And they tried to find any sort of meme, any sort of movement that Americans would say, yeah, I'm joining that might cause them to take over the U.S. for the benefit of Russia. In other words, to take over the U.S. and turn all of the government over to Russia. Well, they couldn't find one. There was nothing the Russians had to offer that with 2 minutes of looking into it didn't suddenly stink. So they even tried to fake us out with a phony baloney NRA, a Russian version. And some very smart people pointed out that there are 5,000 legal private arms in Russia. So yes, out of 170 million people, there's 5,000 private arms. That is not a Second Amendment country. That's a country where nobody has a weapon, period. Nobody gets one. Waiting your turn, going to court will not get you one in Russia. So they could not get us to join up with Russia, that Russia just had nothing to offer. So Putin was very mad at this report. But the psychologist that wrote the report that Putin had ordered said, wait a minute, there is one saving grace. If you can get a candidate into the presidency that is under Russian control, you can use that to flip the United States. We have enough dirt on the top Republicans from when they were here. So we have the dirty movies of each of them involved with prostitutes, or with Lindsay, it's got to be with a male, probably a young man or two. And then we've got the Republicans completely under our thumb. But the way to get, and this they basically said the only way to get an agent into the office of the presidency would be to have him run on the following nonsensical political platform. The U.S. is really screwed up, everything's going to hell, and I'm the only one that can fix it. And that was the motto given to Putin by his advisors. They said, you have to find a guy who will run for office in the U.S., and if he uses that phony bullshit tact, the American people are dumb enough that they will vote him into office, and you then have control over him, and we can have him in there for as many years as we want, because we'll have him in his second term change the 2-year time limit, just like they did in Russia. And they said that's how we will take over the U.S. And that was what the election of Trump was about, and why Putin was so invested in it. So, as you know, Trump did win, but unfortunately the courts held him back. But we have issue number 4, and this one is really scary. And that is, why has absolutely nobody, no television talking head, no writer, not even my favorite, Mary Trump, why have none of them made the connection, which is obvious as hell, anybody can see it, between Donald Trump stealing and fighting as crazy as he can to complete the theft of the documents that have to do with the capability and the nuclear secrets. So which countries have nuclear weapons and which ones have the capability, and also papers on how can you make a nuclear weapon. So why is that information something that Donald Trump is fighting so diligently? And I hate to use a good word to describe him, but why is he fighting so hard in the courts and making no sense? Because there is no argument that will help him. We'll get into that in a sec. But he's making no sense in the courts. He's getting nowhere. Why is he fighting so hard? And at the exact same moment, you see that Ukraine is threatened with nuclear war from Putin. So Putin is both threatening his next-door neighbor with nuclear weapons, the use of nuclear weapons, and is attempting, through his connection with Donald Trump, to get the papers from the U.S. that have probably all the information he needs about the use and who's ready to employ nuclear weapons in the world. We have that information. It's secret. Trump didn't bother looking at it when he was in the presidency. He didn't read anything. He just watched TV. But now that he's out of office, he's got a market for that information, and so he's trying to get his hands on it because it was, unfortunately for him, it was taken away. But the reason he's just fighting like crazy to get it back is because it's worth money to the Russians, or it's worth... They have him 3 or 4 different ways, but the one is they do have that video that he denies about being in the bed with prostitutes and peeing in the bed and things like that. And his explanation for why it can't be true is ridiculous. He said he's germ-phobic. Well, you have your wife in the bed. You had the Stormy Daniels, the prostitute. Oh, excuse me, adult film star. Excuse me. You had her in the bed. Your germophobia didn't seem to stop you there. So that germophobia, if that's the best he could come up with, it's amazing that the idea never came. He never thought of it. He never just walked up to the microphone and said, "No, that's absolutely not true because I love my wife. And I would never do that because it would hurt her emotions if I did that. And I would never do anything that hurts my wife. And you guys can count on that for every rumor you ever hear. If it involves me being cold to my wife, it's not true because I love her and I wouldn't do that." Well, no, that argument did not come out of Dandy Don. Number 5, and this is something that is so obvious, and nobody mentions it. Nobody even poses the question, is it possible that this is happening? And what is that? Okay, this happened the entire time that Trump was in office. And it's happening now with his court pleadings, which every time are laughed out of court. And the reason they're laughed out of court is because they're not written by an American. They're written by his handlers in Russia. And they are clearly, when you look at the grammar and the issues that are laid out, it's written by somebody who's not an American lawyer. And that's why he gets continually laughed out of court. So the examples that you can look for are the strange capitalization. He capitalizes any word that he thinks is important, and that's how Russians do it. But we don't do that in the U.S. in our grammar system. We don't capitalize when we say our country is strong and free. We don't capitalize the S and the F. While they might do that in Russia. So all of Trump's papers filed with the court are not only wrong to a standard where they could easily be thrown out of court, but there's something that they're at a childish level of sniping, which, yes, does occur in Russia. In Russian courts, you're allowed to put in your paper that he's an idiot and blah, blah, blah. But we don't do that in the U.S. And just as Trump puts in his papers always about his victimization, how he's being taken advantage of and all that stuff, that doesn't happen in U.S. papers. If he was being guided by a United States lawyer, he would know we don't put that in. we have to, in our pleading and in our papers, we have the facts of the case and the law applicable to the case as the first 2/3 of our papers, and the last 1/3 of the paper is, therefore, Judge, if you take the applicable law, which, as I told you, is A, and then if you take the facts as they occurred, and this is what happened according to all of our sworn testimony and documents, if you take that as B, then C is, if you apply the law to the facts, we are entitled to win because of case A, B, and C. And they have the absolute right to point out, when I say they, I was talking about the departments, the DOJ, to point out to the judge that something smells, something really is fishy with the pleadings that Donald files. They really are not in any way reminiscent of an American attorney. They are the work of a Russian attorney, where you win your case by first saying how important you are and showing what connections you have in the government and how long you've worked for the government and what awards you have, et cetera, and wow, what a good person you are. And then you say, and here's what I want, and it's really a reasonable request because of X, Y, Z. Well, that's how they can do it. But, I mean, not that's how they could do it, I should say. That is actually how Trump has been trying to do it, and the courts, of course, do not recognize that. And in his very latest pleadings, which was actually it's not a pleading, it was a letter, sort of, that he published online in response to the judge in California stating that it looks very clear to me that he has committed spying. Donald Trump goes on and on about what a victim he is. One of the weirdest, strangest things he writes in this bizarre paper, or I guess it's an email that he wrote to the world, but he wrote that the judge in California, he puts the judge in quotation marks, like he's a so-called judge, but is he really a judge? I don't know what that means, but that is a sick mind, which Trump is, being manipulated by master psychologists in Russia. And I think I missed a beat there. What I wanted to make sure we covered was, what is the carrot? What is the carrot that the Russians hold out in front of Donald in order to get him to do anything they want? And I mean anything. He turns on his children, does anything to keep them happy. And the answer is, they've got the blackmail that we did talk about, a little bit of, he's got the action with the 3 prostitutes that even when they grilled his driver, who's also his bodyguard, and said, well, can you give us a flat no, it didn't happen? He can say, well, I'm pretty sure I was at Donald's bedroom door for a while, but then I left. So if those women came, they did it when I wasn't there. Wow, there's okay. But with the carrot that they hold out in front of Donald is the idea that he's going to have the Moscow Trump Hotel. And that's what he really thinks they're going to give him. And he's an idiot for thinking that. It's just typical falling for Russian propaganda, trickery, because the Russians would never, ever build a hotel as a monument to a person like Trump, who's made all of his money by swindling and filing bankruptcy and getting out of his debts. So the Russians see Trump as the typical capitalism bandit. And they would never, never build a hotel in Moscow named the Trump Hotel. Anyway, So we'll look at that also a little later, but the failure of Trump to appreciate that his desires to have a Moscow hotel in his name is something that the Russians would never consider. And they've been stringing him along with this same, oh yeah, we're looking into it, for 30 years. For 30 years, he's been following the Russians and doing what they want as they hold the promise out in front of him. Yeah, it looks like you're going to get it. And oh yeah, okay, they got you there. It looks like for free. They're gonna just let you build a hotel in Russia. No, none of that's going to happen. Get rid of him. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he is a Russian spy. Now, the fifth point, this is the final one, but this is something that was in the public eye, okay, and has disappeared. And I don't know how people have made something that was on video that we could watch anytime we wanted to on YouTube, how they could make it disappear, but it has disappeared. Try and search for it. But you've seen it. Remember, it was on what we would call TV at the time in 2017 when Trump was running for office. No, I think it would have been 2015. So there was Trump being asked, are you a Russian asset? And his answer is, well, that would be good. If I was an asset is a good thing. So that maybe our two countries that are at war, if I'm a Russian asset, then I can help bring us together and we can blah, blah. And he gave an explanation which made absolutely no fucking sense. Although I believe that he thought it did. It was such a ridiculous explanation that I was pretty sure that they gave it to him and he just took it in and said, yeah, that makes good sense. I like that. When in fact, it makes no sense and is a confession, a complete confession that he is what he calls an asset. But when you look at the documents, which is where we started in MaraLago, if you think you are a Russian asset and you've got those documents stored in your basement, no, you're a spy. And not a low-level spy. You're a spy with what you said was 200,000 pages of top-secret information, and it turns out that it's right about, it's about 20,000 pages. So it's about 10% of what Trump told us. So those are the things that, why is nobody saying? Why is nobody commenting? Why is nobody asking Trump, in your work as an asset for the Russians, where do you get your driving orders from? Where do you get the information where you find out, here's what your handler in Russia wants you to do, and equally as important, who do you relay the information to? We know you've done a great job, because in their eyes, not in mine, because we see you in this picture with what's his name, the Russian, congratulating him, and it looks like you two guys are getting ready to kiss. But so we know you're spying on the U.S. for the Russians. But who is your handler? Handlers could be different people. One who gives him the assignment, one who takes the information back. They definitely don't have to be the same person. They usually are, but no, doesn't have to be. So, and we want to find out from Donald. Hey, Don. What is the difference between an asset in your mind and a spy? In other words, when you say, you admit that you're working for Russia as an asset, what is it exactly? What are the duties of that job that you're saying you do so that we can know what it is you're doing under the guise of I'm an asset? You're an asset to nobody, bud. So Anyway, that's the end of the 5 questions. Why is it nobody is asking these? Why is nobody addressing these? Why is nobody pointing out that Donald is a spy? I just do not understand. You know what? I'm going to put in a bonus 6th. Here's one that just drives me crazy. And I'm not clear if it's an intentional, dirty move by broadcasters or the government or whatever, or how this strange refusal to address a topic, how it's enforced. But there's another topic that the television absolutely refuses to address. Nobody will say the words that I'm going to say. Nobody. The people, and they were at Dandy Don's instruction, he was leading them, but the January 6th treasoners who tried to overtake the government and were within 40 feet, they didn't know it, they were within 40 feet of Mike Pence, and they were going to kill him if they found him. So that group of people, you'll hear all day, there's lots of talk, they were there to overthrow the election. No, they were not. Dumbbell. Don't say that stupid thing. They were there. Those people there were there because they wanted to overthrow the results of the 2000 election. No, they were not. That is not what they were there for. Do you know what those people were there for, what they were trying to do? They wanted to overthrow our government. Not overthrow an election. That's minimizing what they've done. Don't say they were trying to overthrow the government or overthrow the election or overthrow the results of the election. That's what you hear TV saying all the time, and that is because, we don't want to get the Republicans mad at us. We know what Mitch will do. He'll take away our licenses and make us miserable. So none of them will use the correct term for the actions of the January 6th committee, which is they were attempting and came very close. They were almost got it. If they hadn't had a buffoon as the leader of the movement here, we're talking about Trump, following the orders of his Russian handlers, if they would have had somebody here who was real sharp, they would have won. They would have overtaken the government. They would have thrown out Pelosi, et cetera, et cetera. The closest they came, by the way, this is a great story, is the buses. And right about the time that the senators realized what terrible trouble they were in, and how the place had been filled with armed Russian-loving American militia, somehow they got the idea, let's get out of here and we'll come back later. And nobody can say, well, who called the buses? But they looked outside and a bunch of buses lined up for, theoretically, the people in the House to get into the buses to be taken to safety, supposedly. But there was no information as to where the buses were going to take them. And one guy who had been in other countries and seen this trick pulled was the one who said, stop, because they started lining up. They were going to go get on the buses. And he said, no, stop, never, don't get on those buses. You never come back. He said, I've seen this used in other countries. Nobody comes back from those buses. Once they get you on those buses, you're gone. And the new people who are in possession of the grounds, the building that you're on, the government building, they now have won, and that's the end of it. So that's why we have to understand that we need to know who was it who organized and when. Because this person obviously knew what was going to happen. When did they call for a bus? Who put the money up? Who said, I'll pay for it? And remember, when you're talking with your friends, when you're discussing this case, if you're writing about it online, what those people on January 6th were attempting to do was to overthrow our government. That's what they were doing, nothing less. It's not even a close call. And of course, what is the possible penalty for doing that? It's possible to get the death penalty. Goodbye. So they may get the they may get the hanging that they had all set up for Mike Pence. The gallows, they may still make use of them. But remember, that's what was going on. The January 6th committee was attempting and almost succeeding in overthrowing not an election. That's how the TV melts it down so it's not so scary and real. No, they were attempting to overthrow our government. And with that, I will wish you a good night. If you would, please give me a thumbs up down below. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And if you see the little bell down there, go down there, there's a little bell. Please check that. And what that'll do is that'll automatically, because now there's a lot for me to talk to, and especially with the election coming up in just 2.5 weeks. So you'll be getting much more regular, probably one a week, comments from me about the government, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to just sit there, take it easy, and wait for them to come in. But if you'll just subscribe, check the little bell there, see the bell, and give me a thumbs up. Or if you have stars, if you give me 5 stars, that gets me to the top of their search engines when people search for who's got some information on the government that might just have some good ideas. I do. All right. Thank you for listening. And no, I don't have a Patreon page and I don't want your money. But if you were waiting for me to say, here's where you can send me some money, I don't want you to send money. If you've got a couple bucks you want to get rid of, please send it to Ukraine. They need it. They deserve it. Not to podcasters. Thanks a lot.